Language shapes culture. So the more that we feel uncomfortable with the word disability or we weaponize disability terms, we're cool and disabled, right? The fact that we have social media now, which is how a lot of disabled people find each other and are able to find community, even if they experience infrastructure barriers to going to be in community with people in person. Honestly, that is something I kind of wish existed for 9-year-old Tiffany, like the access to be able to find community right away.
What's happening, people? Welcome to this week's episode of Jordan Jarrett-Bryan's The World's Coolest Disabled. You know by now, we are a few episodes in. That is me. Stop fighting it. Stop arguing it. It's just the way it is. I am the self-proclaimed coolest disabled on the planet. Argue with me at your peril. Good luck with that one. Thank you very much once again for joining us on the podcast this week. Just before we get to my guest this week, couple of things. First of all, slap subscribe, whack it in the WhatsApp groups, leave us a comment as well as to who you think we should be speaking to, which links to my second point. I've been inundated with so many messages from so many cool people, emails and DMs of people saying to me, "Hi Jordan, I'm X, I have a disability Y, I'd love to come on the podcast." I'm so flattered and grateful that people are engaging and want to be on the podcast and want to have a conversation with me. But what I want to say is this. The podcast isn't for people that just have a disability, right? Having a disability isn't the thing that gets you onto the podcast, right? The whole point of the podcast is that I felt that disabled people like myself and my guests that we've had only get invited onto programs and radio shows because they're disabled, right? Talk about a very fine, narrow part of their identity. This podcast is for people that are doing really interesting things. They just happen to have a disability. And as you know by now, we explore whether their disability has played a role in the great things that they have done or are doing. So whilst I'm really grateful that you would like to come on the podcast for a chat, just having a disability isn't a prize, right? It's not. I don't see it as an achievement to be disabled, right? I see the achievements that dope people are doing as amazing, and if they happen to have had to overcome something, makes it even more amazing. So, what I'd rather you send me is, "I'm so and so. I've done X, Y, Z, amazingly interesting things. I'd love to have a chat about it. Let's do it. I'm down for that." So, just to let you know, I'm not. Well, I haven't replied to everybody and I will. Not being bougie and rude. It's just, I can't, the podcast isn't about just being disabled. That'd be a very short and maybe boring chat on the podcast. Let's talk about all the amazing things that you are doing. Which leads me to somebody who is doing some amazing things. So I'm really excited about having a conversation with the author of the brand new book, The Anti-Ableist Manifesto, Smashing Stereotypes, Forging Change and Building a Disability Inclusive World. I'm really honored to have on the podcast this week the fantastic Tiffany Yu. Tiffany, how are you doing and welcome?
I'm doing well. I also just want to caveat the UK version of the book. The subtitle is How to Build a Disability Inclusive World. Maybe they thought the US version was too long, but we're still smashing stereotypes and forging change.
I love that. Okay. I love that. And we're going to get into the book, Tiffany, because I'm really interested in exploring some of the themes that you discuss in the book. On this podcast, before we get into all the really important and serious things that we're going to get into, I start off by asking my guests the question, out of 10, what is your coolness number? Right? So obviously I'm the coolest. Obviously, so I'm 11, right? But what would you give yourself out of 10 in terms of coolness?
Ooh, this is a tricky question because I never thought I was cool growing up, and it wasn't until I became a disability advocate that I started feeling cool. So today, I think my number is 8. 8 is a lucky number in East Asian culture, so I'm gonna settle with 8. 8 out of 10, because it also means there's room for improvement.
I like that. I like that. Okay. And what we do by the end of the podcast, we'll revisit that. And then I will let you know, we'll discuss whether 8 was being modest and actually you're a 10, Tiffany, or nah, you're a bit braggadocious and it's more like a 4 sort of thing. So, but either way, we're going to get there and have a laugh doing it. All right. So let's start off with the book, Tiffany, because I've read a few books recently around the idea of disability and how we can be progressive and how people can have a bigger voice and how we can make a better change for people, right? So just tell me and my viewers and listeners, for you, what anti-ableism means and what drove you to want to write this book.
Before I share the definition of anti-ableism, I think I also have to share the definition of ableism. So the definition of
Yes.
ableism that I use is a system of oppression where we devalue someone based on the way their body and or mind works. And we can also take a step back and say that it is the devaluing of disabled bodies and minds. So anti-ableism is what are the actions that we can make or strategies or processes that we can put in place on a daily basis where we are not devaluing people's bodies and or minds. And so I guess taking a step back as to why I wrote this book, I think I took a look at the fact that here in the US, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is turning 35 this year. In the UK, you have the Equality Act of 2010 turning 15 this year. And yet, I think for a long time, we saw policy change as the thing that would fix everything. But what has ended up happening is we have policies in place where effectively we've put the onus on disabled people to enforce them. But again, if you look at this system of oppression that is ableism, we are still seeing the devaluing of disabled bodies and minds despite having policies in place to protect our rights. So I thought more critically, why is that happening? And part of why I think that's happening is we actually have what I call an attitudinal or perception gap around disability as well. We need the attitudes and hearts and minds around disability to effectively catch up to the policy. We can't just start at the policy and then hope that people will catch up. We actually need both the attitudes and perceptions combined with the policy that is actually going to create the type of transformative systemic change that I think we're all hoping for, where all disabled people can thrive. So the series or the book actually was inspired by a social media series I started in 2020 called the Anti-Ableism series. And effectively, the Anti-Ableism series, it was on TikTok and Instagram, was in response to the question, how can I show up better for the disability community? This book is an attempt to answer that question as well. The series has over 300 parts. The book is over 250 pages, all to really highlight there's no one way we can show up better for the disability community, right? It's both just knowing the data out there, it's knowing the everyday microaggressions that we face, it's figuring out ways that both as the public and if we are elected officials or how to foster and deepen that relationship, so that we can try again to create a world where that is not only disability inclusive, but accessible for all of us.
I hear that. And on that point, do you, so I feel that ableism is arguably the final frontier in terms of the form of discrimination that is being dealt with. Okay. I don't think any ism is being dealt with to the level it should be, but I think some are further ahead than others. And without making it the Olympics of oppression, I feel like we are ahead when it comes to sexism, racism, homophobia. I think ableism is the final one that we are trying to deal with right now. Do you agree with that? And if you do, why do you think that ableism isn't taken, and it's just my experience, and this is my anecdotal experience, not taken as seriously as other forms of discrimination?
Ooh, such a good question. So I'll take a step back and share that the first time that the term ableism was ever used was 1981. And I'm born in the 1980s, and I don't think I'm that old. So I wanted to share that because it wasn't until the 1980s that we had language to explain the discrimination and prejudice and bias that we as disabled people were experiencing. right? So when you explain it as kind of the last frontier, when you don't have language to explain something, it also means you don't really have a way to tackle it, right? And so again, discrimination and the devaluing of disabled bodies and minds has existed forever throughout history, but we haven't had language for it until like the last 40 years. So I agree with you in that sense, and I will tie it to that point. I mean, to your question around why, again, it's not having the language to explain it. But I think, I even think about the conversation that we're having around what's called person first language or identity first language. So, person first language is saying, I'm a person with a disability. Identity first language is saying, I'm a disabled person. I know in the UK, disabled person has been used, but here in the US, person first language became popularized decades ago as a way to assert a disabled person's personhood first. But what I will share, the flaw in that thinking is that being disabled doesn't make me less of a person, right? And so even in how we in the US were thinking about language around disabled people by saying, please use person first language, we were already dehumanizing and devaluing the disability experience, even in just the terminology in itself, right? So I think we have a way to go to better understanding the ways that I think one other part of it is that, I'm the daughter of Asian immigrants. And in certain East Asian cultures, if you have an apparent disability, you are hidden away, or you are either seen, or you're either like begging on the street, like putting your disability on display. And so even if I look at my own cultural background and cultural roots, disability was always hidden away, right? And I only think up until recently, so I've been disabled for over almost 30 years. I've been active as a disability advocate for a little over 15 years. I think it's important to make a distinction, kind of like you saying there are disabled people and then there are cool disabled people. So there are disabled people and then there are disability advocates. I make that distinction because 15 years ago, when I started as a disability advocate, I had no visible role models of other people who had disabilities who were broadcasters like you, or even running podcasts or in mainstream television or media. Versus now, I do think it's changing. So I think even with this book coming out, I think we're on the cusp of a cultural shift around disability where people are starting to acknowledge, hey, I want to learn more about what ableism is. I want to actively reflect on the ways that society and me, myself, and my community have been devaluing disabled bodies. And I want to increase the visibility and the representation and the respect of this community so that we don't continue to be dehumanized.
I love that. That's dope. And do you think that there's a tension between, on one side, those trying to ensure, and forgive me, it feels like you're on this side, that the language around disability and getting that correct and the understanding right is really essential in trying to fight the discrimination. We've got to get the language correct, first of all, with a tension on the opposite side, which feels like in trying to get the language down and correct as a community, that potentially is getting in the way of actually doing the work. So I speak to a lot of people with disabilities, and we spend so much time talking about are we disabled people or people with disabilities, and we have that converse so much, we're not actually doing the work, which is, come on guys, there's a bigger fight here. Or do you actually think, no, we need to get those basics right first before we can then do the not literal fighting, but the fighting to ensure that now we are clear on the language of how we discuss this and the problem. Now we can then push back with those that are trying to oppress us. Oppress is probably the wrong word, but those that are trying to discriminate against us.
I'm actually in your camp, where I do think we get a little too caught up in language, that it gets in the way of really addressing more systemic issues. So when people come to me and say, okay, Tiffany, and I always get the question, even though I wrote a whole book about it, they say, okay, if people can take away one thing about how they can show up better for the disability community, what's the one thing? And my answer is to support the disability economy. or a more simplified way of saying that is to support disabled people's livelihoods. I think it's more important to me to really, as we exist in capitalism, support us so that we have the money to cover our basic needs and pursue the things that we want to pursue. But all of that to say, in 2024, there was a campaign, a pretty big campaign that happened here in Los Angeles, which is where I live. And the campaign was disability is not a bad word. And it was in bus stops, it was on billboards, there was a big PR campaign, a lot of press around it. And in my mind, I did think, why in 2024 is the billboard still saying disability is not a bad word? Like, if we can't even get on board with that starting point, I believe that's chapter 1 of my book, then how are we going to get to the bigger parts, right? So, if it were up to me, the billboard would say, pay disabled people.
Yeah.
But, but I also want to acknowledge, so a big part, have you ever taken an improv class?
I have not.
Oh, so much of improv is yes and, right? So you will actually find that many of my answers will be yes and, because I also want to say, yes, don't want language to get in the way of tackling larger systemic issues and paying disabled people and supporting our livelihoods and helping us build careers past just singular entry-level jobs. And language shapes culture. So the more that we feel uncomfortable with the word disability, or we weaponize disability terms by saying, you are cool despite your disability, like erasing your disability experience, removing it from your identity, that does start to shape culture so that the next generations who are coming up see those headlines and say, oh, disability is this bad thing, I'm going to erase it or not bring attention to it, right? When my mind is, we're cool and disabled, right? All at the same time, we can exist in these nuances as well.
I love that. And something you mentioned earlier on that I wanted to kind of touch on as well. You mentioned about your East Asian background and being disabled. And I was at, I believe you were there as well. I was at the NAIDAC exhibition in Birmingham in the UK a few weeks ago. And I was doing some like vox popping and just getting some really cool content from some people that I really wanted to hear from. And one of the questions that I asked a young man was, what's the one thing that we're not talking about as disabled people that we should be talking about? And he said that we're not a monolith, right? And he was of African heritage. And he mentioned that the experience of being a disabled man of African heritage is a different experience to that of someone that's maybe from a particular part of Europe, a particular part of South America. And I wondered what, if indeed there is a unique experience, and obviously we're generalizing here, so this is going to be for everybody, obviously. But as someone of East Asian heritage, was there a particularly unique experience having a disability that you felt or that you saw with other people with disabilities?
Again, depends on who you ask, because I actually do think that as the daughter of Asian immigrants, so my dad is from Taiwan, my mom is a refugee from the Vietnam War. They both came to the US in the 1970s. I do believe that I had a unique experience, although I will say I talked to another friend who's an Asian disabled woman, and she was on a panel and someone had asked her, do you think it's a different experience being disabled when you're Asian as well? And she said no. So I just want to highlight the difference in that nuance there. But I think for me, the way it manifested is that everything is viewed in terms of the household unit. And so what that means is all of my achievements, all of my failures, just who I am is a representation of my entire family. There's a phrase in Mandarin called diolian, which stands for lose face. So you never want to lose face, which means you kind of lose your reputation. So as a result, and I haven't. So I acquired my disability when I was 9 years old. I was involved in a car accident. My dad, who was driving, unfortunately passed away, and I then acquired both paralyzed my arm, and then much later was diagnosed with PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. And I want to share that because of two things. So, number one, as I was doing my own research, one of the things I learned, again, everything's viewed in terms of the household, losing someone in your immediate family meant that somewhere in your ancestral lineage there was bad luck. And because you don't want to lose face, you don't want other people to know that you're bad luck, because if they knew, then they wouldn't want to associate with you. So I actually didn't tell anyone that my dad had passed away until over 10 years after the car accident. I just told people he was away on a trip. Now I had an apparent disability, and again, kind of learning about some of the views of for someone in the family to have a disability means, again, somewhere there's some bad luck, there's some curse in this ancestral lineage. All at the same time, I think it was this whole idea, because I kind of look back at this period of time from 9 years old until 21, where I pretty much tried to assert myself as a non-disabled person. And keep in mind, my right arm is paralyzed. So if I shake your hand, it's going to be with my left hand. Although there was a period of time I would attempt to shake people's hand with my paralyzed right arm. And then I actually think that made things even more awkward than being a left-handed handshaker. But I share that because I think I had internalized so much shame and a desire not to bring attention to myself, that out of respect for this household unit, that I actually made things harder for myself. And the last point I want to bring up is that in a lot of East Asian cultures, mental illness isn't viewed as a disability.
Okay.
And mental health doesn't exist because you can't see it. It's just of your imagination. And I didn't get diagnosed with PTSD until over 20 years after I became disabled. When on paper, if I had looked at a child being in a car where two of her siblings were also in there, her dad passed away, I would probably say there might be some mental health stuff going on.
Yeah.
But again, I think there was so much cultural influence. And at the same time, I also want to put an asterisk that I have a lot of compassion for my mom, because she just did what she knew. And she just believed what she knew. And in some ways, I do feel like I'm breaking that intergenerational pattern by being loud and proud and cool to be disabled. And at the same time, I want to respect and honor that she did what she could do as a parent.
Yeah, of course. And you used a word there that I wanted to talk about as well, the word proud. Because and I know that you've done a podcast with one of my favorites, Bruk, who has a podcast called Disabled and Proud. I'm a big fan of hers. I listened to most, if not all, of her episodes, and she's been kind enough to invite me onto her brilliant podcast twice. And I think it was the first time I was on. She asked all her guests at the end the question, what are you proud to be disabled? I think, or some variation of that question. Apologies, Brooke, if I've butchered it. And I find the question interesting, right? Because a little bit to what I said at the start of this podcast to all the fantastic people that watch and listen to this podcast, I find the idea of being proud and disabled a little bit, just a little bit bizarre, right? Because I don't see disability as something that you achieve. It's something that either you acquire or, in my case, you're born with, right? And whilst I'm not ashamed of my disability, not at all, I find it a bit just a bit awkward to kind of say that I'm proud of I've got a prosthetic leg. I've got one. I'm proud of. I find that just a bit bizarre to say that I'm proud. And not say that I'm right or anybody else is wrong, but what are your thoughts on the idea of having a pride in your disability? Because, like I say, it doesn't mean that I'm right. I'm not saying that I'm right. I've just never been able to. When people say, "Oh, you should be proud to be disabled," I'm like, I didn't earn it. didn't win something. It's something. It's a part of my identity. So what are your thoughts on the idea of pride in your disability?
I will say that one of the ways, or I guess two of the ways that we as disabled people can fight and dismantle ableism is through disability pride and also what I call disabled joy. Because society expects us to be tragic. Society feels shame about our bodies. And so pride to me kind of feels like a middle finger to society to say, hey, I exist. Like you said, I don't feel shame about it. I do, like, I think similar to you, I don't feel proud to have a paralyzed arm, but I feel proud to be part of a community that is filled with movers and shakers who, like the point of your podcast, who are doing really cool things. And I will say that throughout the year, I will usually have a post, and actually this happened at NATEX too, where I'll be in community with so many disabled people, no one's staring at me weirdly or thinking that the way that I move about or how my body moves is weird. We're just all existing and laughing together and having a great time. And I take a step back and I just think, I love us. I love the way that we support each other. We are trying to lift each other up. I have a friend who lives in New York, a disabled friend who every single time she comes to LA, she makes sure to text me. She's like, you are one of two people I text when I come to LA. We kind of catch up because outside of the confines of being in community with each other, we are just navigating. I wanted to curse. We're just navigating so much stuff. Disability pride to me. So I will say that I run an organization called Diversability, and our tagline for the last 15 plus years that we've been around has always been around elevating disability pride together. And we've been very specific with the language because there are so many organizations that are focused on raising disability awareness. And I think you can still be aware of disability, but think that we are less than and think that we are broken and need to be fixed. But when something is rooted in disability pride, you are asserting that we are whole and valuable and worthy simply for existing. So for me, disability pride is really our tool as disabled people to against ableism, to say, hey, you've got a prosthetic leg, I've got a paralyzed arm. We're just here. We're just here doing the thing. And we're just here existing.
Yeah. I love that. No, for sure. And for those that haven't checked out Bruk Millhouse's podcast, Disabled and Proud, go and do it right now. Subscribe. Great podcast. I'm a big fan of Bruk. I don't think she realizes how much of a fan of her work I am. I wanted to also ask you about. Well, I try not to politicize or be political on this podcast where I can avoid it. But I thought an opportunity to ask you, but bearing in mind you are in the States, if you have any strong thoughts on your current president and his attempts to water down DEI, and what impact do you think or are even seeing now that having on disabled people? I personally think that when he talks about DEI, I think he just sees race. That's just my view. I think he sees it as just, anti-immigrant, anti-black. I don't think he sees the full spectrum of DEI, which is also women and is also disabled people and is also gay and such and such. But that's just my personal view. Do you have concerns going forward?
I heard a quote recently that I really love, and it said, we need to take the politics out of policy. And I want to share that because for a long time, disability has always been a nonpartisan issue. And I think there's a difference between being partisan and political. Our existence as disabled people is political, and my hope is nonpartisan.
Yeah.
we have rights that we are fighting for. Am I concerned? Yes. What am I doing about it? I am planning a trip to DC at the end of the month to go meet with elected officials. We have like legislative visits. Uh, this is a small attempt to figure out ways that I can use my voice as an individual. But at the same time, whether whether we whether we will always exist whether or not someone tries to erase us. We are seeing cuts right now. Medicaid right now, a lot of disabled people benefit from that. DEI was one of the first on the president's agenda. But I think that I come back to another quote, which is the fight for justice is a marathon relay. And the reason why I bring that up is I think we will always be fighting for justice. It will just look different from generation to generation. And even since I've been alive, the fact that we have social media now, which is how a lot of disabled people find each other and are able to find community, even if they experience infrastructure barriers to going to be in community with people in person, right? Honestly, that is something I kind of wish existed for 9-year-old Tiffany, like the access to be able to find community right away, because it's in community that we find our voice and we realize that we do have power. So all of that to say, I think we are seeing the impacts right now. We're seeing impacts all around tariffs and its impact on small businesses. Disabled people are 2 times more likely to be small business owners. So then we're seeing the impact of that too, all throughout the supply chain. So yeah, it has made me want to be a little bit more cautious if I'm being totally transparent. But I also don't want to be bullied into becoming someone I'm not. And I've always been, I even looked on our website recently and it does have the words DEI on there. And it crossed my mind for a second if we should update that. And I didn't because I don't, because I still do believe that disability is a part. Like, I don't think that DEI and us having a strong economic imperative are mutually exclusive. And part of all of what's happening right now in DC, and we're seeing some of it happen in the UK as well, is a desire to cut quote unquote wasteful spending, right? And so I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. And whether we're doing our work quietly or loudly for now, I trust that we are still going to organize in community.
Sure. My final question or talking point is something again I ask all my guests, right? And it's something that I'm just massively interested in. I think it's something that as disabled people we don't talk about enough, especially to people who do not have disabilities. It's the area of dating, relationships, and sex, right? And I ask everybody just because I'm just interested. I'm a sponge, right? But as someone with disability, what has been your experience dating? Forgive me, I don't know if you have a partner or not, but if you do, when you were dating, if you are dating, what are the sorts of reactions that you get? What is the I'm using that word experience for the 19th time now. The experience when you tell somebody, the interactions, intimacy. What do you think how do other people receive you in a kind of romantic and an intimate capacities is what I'm asking, I guess.
Yeah. So I currently have a partner, but this is something that I think has been top of mind for many disabled people. Actually, as we're recording this, I think there are at least 2 books specifically about disability and dating. One is called Anti-Ableist, and the other is called Adebowle. So I hope that those become resources and if people are looking for other books to read,
Sure.
and probably more books to come. But I will say, back when I first started dating, I would actually wait to tell the person I was dating about my disability. And most of the time they didn't even notice. And, living in our disabled bodies, we just feel like everyone's staring, or it becomes a focal point. And there was a transition, I think probably once I started being a more vocal disability advocate, where my first photo is, I don't know, me holding my book, or sometimes on my injured arm I'll wear a wrist splint. And a couple of years ago I had an artist draw some artwork on it, so there's a version of my hand in its wrist splint. And I actually make sure to include in at least one or a couple of my photos, uh, me with my wrist splint, or something signifying that I'm really passionate about disability. I will say that, and I don't know if this comes with age, but I have become more confident in myself and more secure in my disability, because one of the things I actually realized is, no matter who you are, if you are dating, you will not share the things that you feel insecure about right away. And I noticed that my paralyzed arm was one of those insecure things. And over time, I became more secure in it, that it became the first thing you saw. I have dated people who told me that they weren't sure if they felt comfortable dating someone who had physical needs, as I do with the paralyzed arm. Um, I also am, and I also know they're not for me. And depending on
Yeah.
what type of relationship you want, I'm looking for a monogamous relationship. Like, you just need one.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and so I actually have done. If I can refer your listeners over to another episode, I was a guest on a podcast about dating with a disability called Be Dateable, or I think it was called the Dateable Podcast or something like that. Uh, but yeah, I feel really grateful that my current partner is very supportive of my disability work. He'll come out to events and stuff like that, and he's just also been very attentive around, uh like, I remember a couple years ago I was like, I just want someone who can help me cut my steak. And
Yeah.
now I realize that is a very low baseline. But he
Low
also
bar.
knows, if we're out for dinner and the dish comes out, he'll switch our plates briefly, as the conversation's going on, and he'll cut the dish, and then we'll switch our plates back. So yeah, such a, I don't know if that's the question that's the question to end on, but yeah, I think and again, I do believe that I think there are other things I'm insecure about in dating that don't have to do with living with a disability. Like, I'm in my late 30s now. The pool looks a little bit different when you're in your late 30s. Most of us have been through like one significant relationship, or you have kids, or you're divorced, and so there are other things.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Well, to end, let's bring it back to the book then, Tiffany. Just give it a final plug, and also what you hope. What's your hope that when people read this book, they take from it? And I guess the answer this question might be both. But is the book directed more for people with the disabilities, or is it actually for people who don't have them to maybe learn about the experiences of people who have disabilities?
Yes. So, to answer your second question first, I wrote this book geared towards someone who wants to learn more about the disability community. So you could have a disability and be newer on your disability journey and find a lot of value out of this book. And you can be non-disabled, but maybe care about justice, or maybe you care about different social issues and want to learn how to be more intersectional in your advocacy. So I will share that one of my early readers described the book as a must-read for humanity type of book. But the book is very much primer level. I was hoping it could be relatable, approachable, and digestible. Every chapter averages around 7 to 8 pages, so you can, read a chapter a day and finish the book in about a month. If you want to read 7 to 8 pages. And every single chapter ends with reflection questions. And I've had people who are disabled tell me that they're working through the reflection questions with their therapist, right? To unlearn your own internalized ableism if you are a disabled person. But I think the takeaway, and I guess this may be a good time to introduce the Anti-Ableist Manifesto art, which is a piece of art that has about 30 statements on it, ranging from things like disability is not a bad word or a bad thing, disability is intersectional, we are not a monolith, just thinking about things that we discussed on this podcast. And the art is actually introduced at the end of the book, but the art has been making its way across social media because everyone can engage with a piece of art. And so my hope is that you have this piece of art and it's hanging in your home or in your workspace somewhere, and it becomes a conversation starter to say, whoa, look at that. It's got a lot of words on it. And my hope is that there will be some statement or statements on here that resonate with you. But in terms of what I hope readers will take away, I think the word is hope. The word is hope that building a disability inclusive world is possible. Because, we as disabled people are a creative force. We're cool, we're innovative, we're adaptive in so many different ways. And I think that the more of us, and I even thought about in the design of the cover itself, I want it to be bold, but I want it to be something that, stands out because that's how I see our community. And at the same time, growing up in the social media era, I wanted to make sure that, maybe you don't pick up the book, but you can engage with the art and have that be your starting point about how you'll show up into the community. But yeah, my hope is that you feel hope and know that no matter who you are, there are actionable things that you can do to be anti-ableist or to not devalue disabled bodies and or minds.
Amazing. And everyone go out there, go grab a copy. The Anti-Ableist Manifesto in all good bookstores and online. Go and cop yours. I've got mine. I'm starting mine tomorrow. I've just finished. I'm the slowest reader in the world. I'm the slowest reader on the planet. I'm really cool, but I'm a slow reader. So I've just finished a book that took me like 2 years to get through. I'm not even lying, like literally 2 years. So this is next up on my list for sure. So make sure you guys out there go and get yours. You said at the start that you think you were an 8 out of 10 in terms of your coolness rating out of 10. I'm going to disagree respectfully. All right. I'm going to go to a 9.5 because I think that you're doing some amazingly cool work. I've got so many friends that have written books. I don't envy them at all. I've seen secondhand, if you like, how much work and time goes in to producing a book. But not just it's a book that's a book of importance in terms of it's not like a novel or it's not non-fiction. This is a book that actually you want to have an impact on a society, and writing those kinds of books are always, I think, even harder to write. And you've exposed yourself in a vulnerability with a disability to try and do better for the wider community. So I think that's super, super dope. And you're also doing it in a country with a president that, doesn't seem to be the best friend of people like me and you. So pushing against the current zeitgeist, I think is super, super cool. So I'm bumping it up. I'm going to 9.5. I'm going to a 9.5, Tiffany, and I won't hear anything against that because you're super cool. We're gonna go up one. We're gonna go up 1.5 for sure. Happy with that?
Yes, thank you. Well, I was gonna say that now that I've been on your podcast, I probably at least get a point extra.
Fair point. Fair point. That's a fair point. I like that. And Tiffany, listen, thank you so much for your time. I'm so gutted that I missed you when you were here. It was the same events, and we didn't actually ever.
I know we were at two of the same events together, and just so happened to miss each other. But I'm so glad that we could connect afterward.
No, for sure, for sure. And next time you're in town, I don't know if you're back this year or maybe next year. Let's make sure we catch up for a coffee or something, because I'd love to meet you in person. Keep up the amazing advocacy that you are doing, because we need more voices like yours. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. And with that, do you know what to do at home, guys? Subscribe, share, leave a comment, whack it in the WhatsApp group, share. Until next time, peace.